This episode of Brains on Games is about a miniatures game that's coming up on Kickstarter in a few weeks. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald, and this episode we're going to talk about a game that was sent to me a little while back. It's a game that's coming up on Kickstarter early in November, a game called Rapture from Gravity Bay. This is a game for 2 players. You can play it in an hour or two, and I would say that kids age 14 and older would be able to make sense out of this game. You can see it says starter box here. There are several different boxes that were sent to me from Gravity Bay. This is clearly a passion project, I should say. They sent a handwritten note along with their little parcel. Anyway, they've got multiple different starter boxes for different factions in the game. And this is a miniatures battle game, sort of a skirmish level game, meaning that you're going to have a few characters on the board at any given time. One of the things that this really stood out to me the second I opened up the box is that these minis are super detailed, and some of the character designs are, here, I'll put it on this side. Some of the character designs are really cool. They've got a faction called Angels. I think that was the box that I held up, and they've got these figures that have great big, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, that have great big wings, and crazy looking armor, and it would look a lot cooler if it was painted. But I'll tell you what I learned this week. Number one, I do not have the patience to glue models together, or maybe it's the fine motor skills that I'm lacking. Gluing these things together was a brutal exercise for me. I never made model cars or model airplanes when I was a kid, so I guess I've learned where my weaknesses are. We're very lucky that I'm making this video without a bunch of these figures glued to my fingers, because that did happen a few times. The character models are really cool, I think, and unique. I've got a few figures from, well, one of them from the New World Order box, but these other ones are from the Atlantis starter box. And I just think these Atlantis figures I mean, there's something special about these little guys. This is a turtle character, and some of them have extra pieces on the base that you can see here, little waves or seaweed flowing up around them. Like I said, these things would be a lot cooler if they were painted, and that's sort of the first thing that I wanted to talk about. I haven't talked about miniatures wargaming before, partly because often these games are pretty complicated. Hopefully I'll be able to present this in a way that's going to make sense, but also because I never painted these miniatures. But I think the act of putting these things together and painting them, you've got a situation where you're doing, it's a little bit of crafting. I have a friend who's really an expert at painting these models. He's got a ring light with a magnifying glass. He used to have big shelves full of these figures at his house. And he's really skilled at it. But I mean, once you get up to the teenage level, how many craft projects are you doing? Not very many, at least for the teenagers I know. And so this is an opportunity to exercise some creativity and to exercise those really fine motor skills when it comes to building the models and then painting them. So mine aren't painted, but you'll be able to see, I'll show you some pictures as we go through the episode. Some pictures of painted models are going to pop up. There's another thing that I think is interesting about these miniatures games, and that is, I mean, if you've ever been to a game store where they're playing these things, they have big tables and they're full of buildings and terrain and trees and hills. It's like a big sand table. It's kind of bringing, as I think about it, and even when I used to play miniatures games, but they were pre-painted miniatures, and it was usually a flat table that we were playing on with like some sort of a map on it. And here on the table, I've got this green mat. My friend Adrian will be happy that there's a green background today. He's been talking about a green background for a while. He's hoping that I could put that on the table. But really, this green background is a cutting mat. It's the kind of crafting mat you can probably see there may still be bits of glue on it, because I used to make some scenery for those flat games using cardstock and a printer. And then I'd cut it with a paper knife or scissors, and we glue things together. So there's still probably bits of glue on this mat. This cutting mat is like one of those self-healing mats. So there have definitely been some cuts in it over the years, but you can't really see them. It's a nice mat too because it has this grid on it, which does make it a little bit easier to line things up to make sure you're cutting things straight. I'll include a link in the show notes to a website that I found that has reams of downloadable Papercraft sceneries that you can use. The Rapture game is one where you're basically marking out a 90 by 90 centimeter square, and that's your playing area, and then you're going to put things in it. Now you can use shoe boxes. I've put here on the table, this is the box from Burgle Bros, which is, here you go, which is my favorite cooperative game. One of these days I'll talk about it on the show, but the box looks like a building and it has a little helicopter area on the top. So I thought that would be appropriate for showing these miniatures games because you can use anything as obstacles or scenery. But I like those Papercraft things because it's inexpensive. It's a craft that you and the kids can do together, and it's sort of thematic. I've seen tanks and walls and hedges and bushes and whole buildings that are made out of this stuff, and all it requires are the plans, a printer, and some cardstock thick paper. Like I said, you can create any kind of scenery you want. So again, the creativity comes up, and again, you're doing some crafting that requires that fine motor skill. These figures are going to be moving around the board and battling one another. Each of them has associated with it a card like this that has statistics and information about what that figure can do. This is a guy who's riding on this great big octopus who looks like this. He's one of the big boss characters in the game. And there are a number of things on the card that you'll be able to pay attention to here. But a couple of things I think that are neat. One is that this is a character, that big octopus is a character that has some helpers that come along with it. In this case, these tentacles, which he's got two different ones. So this has two on one base, but then there's a second one here, like this. The tentacles can appear in the game, and that's one of the ways that he can attack the other characters on the board. The back of the card has more detail about the different actions that that character can take. But this is one of my favorite things, I think, about the game. There's two things that are different from the previous war games that I've played, and war gamers will be able to tell me if these are unique or not, but they were unique to me anyway. I hadn't played games like this before, and that is that they have a morale tracker on the side. So there's certain things that can happen in the game that will drop your character's morale, and then they may at some point try and escape the map, and then you sort of lose control of them unless you can get another figure over nearby that can rescue them or convince them to come back into the fight. That's one thing that I think is interesting. The other thing that's interesting about the game is that the cards show how many actions your figure can do during a turn. You might have 2 action points or 3, but they also have reactions. I can move this octopus towards you and try and take a shot at one of your figures on the board, but you can react to that. As I'm moving, you get a chance to take a shot at that figure. So I thought that was interesting too, because it keeps everybody involved. Your characters can react to their opponent's movements during their turn. You're not just waiting until it's your turn to do the next thing. Of course, if you're playing with multiple players and multiple figures, you're probably not going to have enough reaction points to react to everything, so you may still have to do some budgeting. We talked a lot about budgeting actions or budgeting resources in these kinds of games. You're also going to be working towards some sort of a goal. There's a mission that each faction is going to have that gets chosen at the beginning. That can make each game a little bit different. The missions require the map to be set up a certain way, and that adds some variety. Even when you're playing with the very same teams, if you're doing a different mission, it changes up the game. There's another thing that's happening. So you've got the missions, so you're going to be planning ahead, and your opponents are going to be trying to complete their own mission, but probably trying to mess with yours as well. That's going to involve some problem solving, and you've got to be flexible in your problem solving. And if we're talking about flexible problem solving, that's fluid reasoning. You've also got so much information to keep track of with multiple figures, all with different statistics and so many things happening on those cards. And you're keeping track of morale to make sure that your figures aren't walking off the board when you need to use them. Executive functions and working memory are happening there as well as you're trying to complete those missions. Another thing that's happening in this game is that you don't have a board. You're not going to have a grid like this. You may put some things on the table that your characters have to maneuver around, or things that they might have to pick up and carry, but you don't really have a board. How do you figure out how far these little miniatures can go? Well, they have a movement statistic, and that tells how many centimeters they can move on the board. One of the things you need to play a game like this is a measuring tape or a ruler of some kind. I like these flexible fabric ones because they just roll up when you're not using them. And it's right side up for me in inches, but here I guess it's upside down. Let me flip it around. You need centimeters here. So for our American viewers, you're not only going to be learning to estimate distances with measurement, but you're also going to learn a little bit about the metric system. You're doing some estimates. If this guy can move 15 centimeters, you can't measure ahead of time to see if that's going to get you far enough. You call your action and then you do the measuring. Now, if you find out that you can't get as far as you wanted to, you can change your action, but you might find yourself becoming messed up. That's one of the things that I often have trouble with these kinds of games, is estimating those distances. And those estimates, of course, you're thinking about measurement and you're thinking about those visual spatial skills, visual planning in this case, and estimation. And that is Rapture in a nutshell. And I really do feel like I've barely scratched the surface of what's going on in this game. The rule book is over 100 pages long. I mean, it has lots of pictures, but there's lots of things that are going on here that I've barely touched on or haven't touched on at all. But we're talking about skirmish level battles. We're talking about opportunities for creativity and those fine motor skills. If you're painting, if you're building buildings or landing strips or pathways for these characters to move around on. We're talking about the executive functions and flexible problem solving that are involved when you're trying to work towards those mission goals that each character has. And there's some variability there, which I like. You've got also the spatial skills, measurement, and estimation that are coming out when you're figuring out ranges and movement distances and things like that. So there's a lot happening here, and you've got that morale system and the reaction system that can keep everyone engaged even on another player's turn. If you have questions about this game or suggestions for the show, you can always find me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website where previous episodes are posted, and future episodes will go up there too. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Instagram feed and the Facebook page. And if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.